There's quite a few number of laws that have actually come into force quite recently. There's the National Environmental Management Waste Act, which commenced on the 3rd of July 2009, and that obviously deals with a lot of the waste issues. There was a previous act, the Environment Conservation Act, that dealt with them before, but now the Waste Act, from a compliance and enforcement perspective, assists us in doing our enforcement in terms of waste issues in a much more effective way. With regard to air pollution, we're still unfortunately operating under the Atmospheric Pollution Prevention Act, but there is a new act that hopefully will commence probably by the beginning of next year, which is the Air Quality Act, and I'm talking specifically about the provisions that deal with enforcement, and that'll also assist us in doing better enforcement in terms of air pollution issues. And then there are a number of amendments that we've had recently commenced now in September, that also assist us to do compliance and enforcement better around pollution and waste, increased penalties that take a lot of our penalties up to 5 million rand or 5 years in prison, 10 million rand or 10 years in prison. In the past we've been dealing a lot with outdated legislation, with unenforceable permits that have been very difficult to ensure that companies comply with, because a lot of the terms are quite vague. We now obviously, in terms of the new legislation, can deal with those issues. With regard to air pollution, there haven't really been enforceable norms and standards, which with the new legislation should address that as well, which would allow us to actually enforce emission standards. So that deals with the legislation issues. I think another significant challenge is capacity and resources. We obviously have tried to create structures that allow for EMIs, or environmental management inspectors, to actually do the work that we need them to do. However, there's never enough people. We do have a few challenges around our criminal cases. So a lot of, particularly the pollution and waste cases where we've finalized criminal investigations, we're not seeing a lot of outcomes in relation to those cases. Once the investigation is completed, it's handed over to the National Prosecuting Authority, and a lot of our cases at that point result in delays for a number of reasons.
The department has got a training program whereby over 286 prosecutors have been trained, over 200 magistrates have been taken through a workshop on environmental crimes. And there has been a discussion between the Minister of Justice and the Minister of Water and Environmental Affairs about the re-establishment of the environmental courts. In terms of capacity, having realized that there's lack of capacity within the respective spheres, the three spheres, which is national, provincial and local, decided to sort of join forces and have an integrated approach in terms of doing compliance and enforcement.
I think at the outset it is important to say that businesses must comply with the legislation. I think it is not really negotiable. What we're saying is that we're going to be quite strict moving forward, particularly with this new legislation, to ensure that those minimum requirements are complied with.